Guns, vampires, and Arkane Studios sounds like the recipe for an awesome game, right? It probably should have been. But what we got instead was a buggy, incomplete mess that seemed like it came out of left field. How could a game from Arkane, the studio that gave us the awesome immersive sims like Prey and Dishonored, come out like, well, this? That's exactly what we're about to find out, so grab your garlics and your crucifixes as we dig into what happened to Redfall. Redfall's overall lack of polish came as a shock to just about everyone who was looking forward to it, myself included. As a bot who has been a big fan of Arkane since Dishonored, it felt strange to be playing an Arkane game, one with their signature visual style and flair, and think, man, why does this feel so busted? As it turns out, the reasons for Redfall's situation at launch are almost the same as other games that have suffered a similar fate with only minor differences. Like a story you already know being told by a different person. Impossible scope, lack of direction, mismanagement, and staff leaving the company in droves over a project that internally seemed like it was destined to fail. It's all there. It's all the same ingredients we've seen before. But that's the end of the story. Let's go back to when Redfall was first conceptualized, the last time it seemed like it had any promise. According to the LinkedIn profile of senior level architect for Arkane, Francisco Cruz III, Redfall was in its incubation period as early as August 2017. What else did Arkane have going on that year? Well, the long in development reboot of Prey shipped in May of that year, and the one-shot expansion Dishonored: Death of the Outsider shipped in September. These were both great games characteristic of Arkane's strengths, and everything seemed to be going well for the studio. For others around them, not so much. As for ZeniMax Media, the parent company of Arkane, along with other legendary studios like Bethesda Softworks, id Software, and Machine Games, things weren't looking too hot. While all of the games released under their banner trend towards awesome, memorable titles, the sales of those games had become kind of an issue. With the exception of Doom Eternal, every ZeniMax game has failed to set sales charts on fire since the release of Fallout 4 back in 2015. ZeniMax needs two things to continue to let their stable of studios do their thing: money and time. But without significant money coming in, it's difficult to allow for insane development timelines like Starfield, which is only releasing after 7 years of development. Fallout 4 also took 7 years to reach the finish line. In order to keep the ship afloat, ZeniMax began to put the feelers out for potential acquisition by a larger company. If somebody else was footing the bill, they could continue to fund and support the prestige titles they were known for. There was even a point in time when ZeniMax was close to being acquired by EA, and thank goodness that did not happen. We all know what EA likes to do with studios that it buys. Dum dum da dum da da dum da dum da dum. While ZeniMax Brash searched for a sugar daddy, they encouraged their studios to create games that had the capacity to generate even more money. Games that had things like microtransactions and deep online features that fostered constant player engagement. Yes, the plague that has been cursing the gaming industry for what seems like forever now, games as a service, was the crutch ZeniMax wanted to lean on. And why not? They have a stable of beloved IPs, and Overwatch and Fortnite were printing money for their respective companies at the time. This new company initiative would be apparent in games that were released in years that followed, like 2018's Fallout 76 and 2019's Wolfenstein Youngblood. In case you weren't paying attention back then, these games didn't exactly stick their landings. Even Doom Eternal, a game that was initially promised to have 0 microtransactions, had paid cosmetic packs added after release. By the time Redfall was out of incubation and entering full-on development sometime in 2018, games as a service was the company mandate. On top of that, Arkane's head honchos wanted to make something that would be more appealing than Prey, or any of their other single-player immersive sims. They wanted to make an online multiplayer game that would serve as a platform for further monetization through paid cosmetics and other microtransactions. What they wanted to make was not an Arkane game. That's the conclusion I came to during the research for this video, and it seems I wasn't alone in thinking that. According to reports, when Redfall was pitched to the staff that would be working on it, it was being referred to as a multiplayer Arkane game. an oxymoron if I'd ever heard one. Team members at Arkane Austin were reportedly confused about the jump. Whether or not Arkane's signature gameplay could even work in that format was still up in the air for most people. However, not everyone at the studio seemed to be as confused or concerned. The first stop in getting Redfall's development started was assigning the role of its director, a responsibility that would be split between Harvey Smith and Ricardo Behr. If you don't know who these industry veterans are, here's all you need to know to get up to speed. Both of these people have contributed to the classic games that defined the immersive sim genre. The duo worked on games like the original Deus Ex, The Invisible War, and Thief: Deadly Shadows, before teaming up again for Dishonored. Smith and Behr weren't just some chuckleheads from off the street. They were accomplished designers and directors that any game would benefit from having as co-directors. Or at least that's how it seemed at the time. As development progressed, it seemed like neither co-director had figured out just how to present Arkane's style in the new format. Several anonymous sources who worked on the project said that Smith and Behr would reference games like Far Cry and Borderlands in their talks with the dev team, but never gave them a clearly defined path to follow. With two directors, you would think there would be double the direction for the project, but instead there wasn't as much as there probably should have been. Making matters worse, the projected scope of Redfall with its large open world and multiplayer trappings was a strain on Arkane's available development staff. According to the Redfall report by Jason Schreier, Arkane had less than 100 employees during Redfall's development. To put that in perspective, the latest Borderlands games had over 300 people working on it at the peak of its development. That's 3 times the workforce, and those developers had 2 other well-known games to chart a course by. ZeniMax brought in Roundhouse Studios and assorted other dev houses to outsource some of the workload, but even then, that was nowhere near enough dev power to support this game. As a result, confidence in the project diminished, and the desire to continue to work at Arkane vanished for many staff members. By the time Redfall hobbled out of their doors like a melting, T-posing Frankenstein's monster, an estimated 70% of the people who brought Prey to life had left Arkane for greener pastures. Even replacing the departing devs was a debacle. Redfall's existence was still under wraps, so they could only provide limited details to prospective recruits, and people who were applying to work at the studio were only interested in building immersive single-player games. You know, like the studio was known for. As Redfall's development continued to limp along for years in more or less the same confused state, a sudden silver lining appeared in September of 2020. ZeniMax finally found a sugar daddy in the form of Microsoft. Microsoft purchased the company for a whopping $7.5 billion. The acquisition brought all of the studios under the ZeniMax banner into the Xbox Game Studios stable, and that gave the Redfall team some hope, but not in the way you might think. Apparently, those working on Redfall were actually hoping that Microsoft would take a look at the game and cancel it, or, on a more positive note, allow them to reboot it as a single-player immersive sim they all wanted it to be. Luckily for Arkane Austin, Microsoft did actually cancel Redfall, or rather they canceled a version of it. See, they shut down the PS5 version of the game to make it an Xbox exclusive. So, unfortunately, development continued. Microsoft took a hands-off approach to Redfall's development, and for the record, I'm speculating that was mostly due to the studio's track record rather than negligence on Microsoft's part. Arkane games are bangers, but don't really sell that well, so they're perfect fodder to bolster the Game Pass offerings. So why wouldn't you give an accomplished studio complete autonomy to do what they do best? Much to Arkane Austin's chagrin, and despite not engaging with the project outside of canceling the version for a rival platform, Microsoft latched onto Redfall and positioned it as a big, exciting new IP for Xbox, something the company and the platform desperately needs even now. When E3 2021 rolled around, the very first and last Xbox and Bethesda E3 showcase ended with Redfall as its one more thing. The head of Xbox and CEO of Microsoft Gaming, Papa Phil Spencer, introduced the project as a brand new, original game from the Arkane team at Bethesda, the studio that created Prey and Dishonored, the very games Arkane leadership didn't want the game to be like. Oh boy. To be fair, the reveal trailer was awesome. It really did look like a spooky, horror-themed Borderlands-style 4-player co-op shooter, and your good buddy Kino was ready to fight some vampires. I went and bought so much garlic, I don't know what to do with it. Unfortunately, as successful and confident as that reveal was, the team at Arkane was still struggling to get the project in a workable state. As staff members continued to leave and the battle to replace them was continually lost, the ambitious summer 2022 release date window at the end of the reveal trailer continued to slip. A delay was formally announced via Twitter on May 12, 2022 that pushed the game to the first half of 2023, and then an insider report of an internal delay was confirmed in January of 2023 to push the release back to the beginning of May in 2023. In between those announcements, the cracks in the awesome facade were beginning to show. Some hands-on previews didn't wow players, and the complete lack of 60 FPS mode at launch was announced on Twitter less than a month before release. The fallout of that announcement actually had people calling for Microsoft to delay the game again. And you know how impatient gamers can be. The fact that they were asking for them to take more time says a lot. And maybe they should have. As Xbox's first ever $70 game, Redfall definitely soured many people's opinions about Xbox as a brand, and its ability to create games that are original and worthwhile. But would another delay have helped it to come out differently? Remember earlier when I said that Redfall's lack of quality felt like a complete surprise? Do you know who else was surprised by how Redfall turned out? Phil Harrison, the guy who announced the game on stage at E3 2021. Harrison went on what kinda seemed like an apology tour after Redfall was released. On the Kinda Funny Games XCast podcast, he was really open about his disappointment.
There's nothing that's more difficult for me than disappointing the Xbox community.
He took full responsibility for how the game turned out and was surprisingly open about the situation, considering his status at Xbox. He promised that Arkane would continue to work on the game to improve its faults, and they have to a degree. But Harrison also said something that made my little ears perk up. There are quality issues, and we're working on those, but a fundamental piece of feedback I get from Redfall reviews is that the game isn't realizing the creative vision that it had for its players. That doesn't feel like a, hey, just delay it. That feels like the game had a goal to do one thing. And when players are actually playing, they're not feeling that. By Harrison's own admission, Redfall more or less fails on a fundamental level of its execution. That being, I feel, that it doesn't feel like an Arkane game when you play it. It has the look, but none of the focus, polish, or execution that made games like Prey and Dishonored great, and that much was clear to the staff at Arkane from the very start. Unfortunately, that's not the kind of thing that a simple delay can fix. I know that all sounds like doom and gloom, and it's easy for us as consumers to shake our fists and complain about the finished product, but making games is hard. There's so many moving pieces that go into every large media project that it feels almost impossible, like a miracle that anything comes out. Even more so under the difficult circumstances Redfall faced during its development, not including COVID. It's not like there was no attempt to right the ship either, as Harvey Smith won out over the whims of ZeniMax leadership to remove the in-game store and microtransactions from the game a few years into development. Sheesh, can you imagine if the game released how it did and had microtransactions? That would have been the nail in the coffin for Xbox. Personally, I really hope that Arkane can turn Redfall around, the same way that CD Projekt Red did for Cyberpunk 2077, or how Hello Games did for No Man's Sky. But even several months out from release, Redfall's future remains uncertain. Let us know what you thought of Redfall down in the comments. The good, the bad, and everything in between. I want to know it all. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider joining our Patreon like these awesome people to watch our content early.